Today was my daughter's birthday. I walked into the fashion company where she worked carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. And the moment I stepped through the door, I heard a voice screaming, "How dare a filthy little rat like you touch my things?" Through a gap in the frosted glass, I saw my daughter on her knees sobbing. And when I looked at the woman screaming at her, my blood turned to ice because that woman was my wife. Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you how the morning started because that matters. The sunflowers cost $12 from a street vendor on Wilshire. My daughter Claire had loved sunflowers since she was 4 when her mother Diana planted a row of them along our back fence in Pasadena. Diana died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. I built a shipping empire from nothing. Negotiated in boardrooms across 3 continents without blinking. And none of it prepared me for watching the person who held my whole life together disappear that fast. This morning wasn't about grief, though. It was about surprising my daughter at work on her birthday. I wore an old olive jacket frayed at the cuff bought at a surplus store the year I left the Marines. My assistant, Marcus Webb, 11 years with me, a Marine Corps brother before that, raised an eyebrow at it and told me I had 3 Hugo Boss suits in my closet. I told him I was aware. He knew, the way he always knew that some days call for the version of yourself that existed before the money. Claire had taken a design internship at All Fashion Group 8 months earlier without telling me until after she'd accepted it. That was Claire. She never used my name in professional settings. As far as anyone at all knew, she was a 23-year-old intern from Pasadena, very good at her job, very private about her life. I respected that completely. I parked 2 blocks from the Era building, signed in as a surprise visitor, and rode the elevator to the 4th floor. That's when I heard the voices behind the frosted glass doors of the design department. One voice was sharp, trained to cut without needing volume. The other was quiet. My daughter's voice. The sound of someone holding something unbearable. Very, very still. Look at yourself. A broke little nobody from nowhere. You actually thought you had the right to touch this collection. Then louder. How dare a filthy little rat like you touch my things? I leaned toward the gap in the doorframe. And there she was, my wife, Vivian. Beside her stood her daughter from a previous relationship, Cassandra Marsh, 28, arms crossed, watching Claire with lazy amusement. "Mom, she's so slow," Cassandra said, examining her nails. "They really will hire anyone these days." Vivian made Claire pick up scattered portfolio pages off the floor, one by one, on her knees, while Cassandra laughed and called it fitting for someone with her background. Then Vivian delivered the real blow. "I'm going to suggest gently that perhaps this internship isn't the right fit for anyone." And as she and Cassandra walked out, Cassandra swept the neatly res-tacked pages back onto the floor with the back of her hand. Oops. I didn't walk through that door. I stepped back into an alcove and let them pass 8 feet from me without seeing me. Then I watched my daughter, alone now, pick up those pages a second time, while 2 staffers who'd witnessed everything stared at the floor and did nothing. Something in my chest didn't tear. It shattered into something colder and more permanent than rage. A decision. Because here's what I understood standing in that hallway. This wasn't a coincidence. Vivian had appointments, a portfolio, Cassandra dressed and ready. She'd chosen Claire's birthday on purpose for maximum damage. This had been planned. I set the sunflowers against the base of the building and called Marcus. "Pull everything on Alara Fashion Group," I told him. "And find out how long Vivian has known Claire works there, not when she found out. How long she's known and said nothing." By the time I got back to my house in Malibu, Marcus was already at the kitchen table with 3 legal pads of handwriting. What he'd found in 3 hours made me wish he hadn't found it at all. Vivian had known about Claire's job for at least 3 weeks, confirmed by a lunch she'd had with the Era director, paid for on the household account, followed 2 days later by an unannounced VIP appointment she'd never mentioned to me. Worse, over 22 months, systematic transfers had been bleeding out of our household accounts. Each one small enough to avoid automatic review, adding up to $840,000, funneled into a Nevada shell company and a personal account in Cassandra's name. In California, moving marital assets like that on a spouse over 65 is financial elder abuse. And my estate attorney of 4 years, Derek Sloan, had been billing Vivian privately for something coded as document preparation. In plain English, he'd been helping her draft a new will. Then Marcus told me the part that made the room go quiet. My blood work from July had shown markers my doctor blamed on age. Marcus had a toxicologist friend review it. Those same markers can also indicate prolonged low-dose sedative exposure. I thought about the glass of red wine Vivian poured for me every night, always from a bottle she opened herself, always handed to me directly. I thought about the tremor in my hands I'd written off as getting older. I sent Claire a text that night. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I love you." She sent back a sunflower emoji. 3 words. "Love you, Dad." She had no idea what I now knew. And I intended to keep it that way until I was ready to move. I didn't sleep. At 6:15 the next morning, I drove to a private clinic in San Diego and gave blood to a toxicologist named Dr. Hatch. While I was driving back up the coast, a nurse from Cedars-Sinai called. Claire had been in a car accident on Bunker Hill Drive, hit from behind by an SUV that never stopped. She was alive. Bruised ribs, a sprained wrist, a gash above her eyebrow, but alive. Sitting beside her hospital bed, I asked her to tell me the truth. And what came out wasn't just about the crash. Her laptop had gone missing 2 weeks earlier. Her car had been keyed in the Aurora garage. Someone had anonymously reported her to HR for theft 3 days before. She told herself she was being paranoid. She wasn't. That afternoon, Dr. Hatch called with the toxicology results. Temazepam, a prescription sedative present in a pattern consistent with 4 to 8 months of deliberate controlled dosing. Not an accident. Someone had been feeding it to me in amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice, large enough to keep me compliant, more suggestible, less likely to question things, less likely to push back against someone I trusted. The same day, Marcus pulled traffic camera footage from Bunker Hill. A dark gray Chevy Suburban rented that morning from an enterprise in Burbank under a name that didn't check out, paid for by a card tracing back to the same Nevada shell company that had been draining our accounts. I called Marcus with 3 orders. Freeze every joint account Vivian could touch before the business day closed. Find a family law attorney with 0 connection to my existing legal team. He already had one in mind, Catherine Doyle, the best in California, and get every bottle of wine out of that house before Vivian got home without her knowing why. Then I went to see Janet Morse, my executive assistant of 12 years. She'd been coerced. Cassandra had dug up an old, already repaid financial mistake involving Janet's son and used it as leverage, forcing Janet to hand over my calendar and confirm Claire's workplace. Janet had refused to give up my medical portal credentials, which was the one line she wouldn't cross. She wrote a full statement that night and called Catherine Doyle before she went to sleep. The next morning, Marcus arrived with an envelope and a face like he hadn't slept. Her legal name isn't Vivian Hole. He said it's Vera Maslow. Born in Fresno, 1972. The San Francisco family. The private school background. None of it's real. She built the identity in 2004 and has been living inside it for 20 years. 2 prior marriages under that same false identity. A Portland developer who lost $2.3 million and a Scottsdale surgeon who died of a cardiac event 14 months into their marriage. His estate contested by his own children. A marriage built on a fabricated identity isn't grounds for divorce in California. It's grounds for annulment. Treated as if it never legally existed. No community property. Everything stays mine. There was one more photograph in that envelope. Security footage from storage room showing Cassandra herself cutting the seam of a $40,000 gown. The same gown she and Vivian were planning to publicly blame on Claire. And a second image from the parking garage. Cassandra tampering with the brake sensor housing on Claire's car 3 days before the accident that put her in the hospital. That was the last piece I needed. I called Douglas Funn, the majority shareholder of Ala Fashion Group, and bought his 40% stake outright that same afternoon. A 15% premium cash, no conditions. By 3:17 p.m., I owned 60% of the company that had let my daughter be tortured for months. Nobody there would know until it was too late to matter. I brought everything to Detective Aaron Reyes' lap: the toxicology report, the financial trail, the surveillance photos, Janet's signed statement. He confirmed the brake sensor tampering forensically and drafted arrest warrants. Vehicular assault with intent for Cassandra, criminal poisoning and elder financial abuse for Vivian. I gave him one piece of information where they'd both be the following night. All's annual gala. I went to see Claire at the hospital to tell her, and that's when my daughter told me something that stopped me cold. 7 months earlier, she'd stumbled onto an email thread on our shared cloud account, a draft of my will, cutting her out entirely, redirecting everything to Vivian, and a trust in Cassandra's name. She didn't know if I'd requested it myself. She didn't want to be the daughter who accused her father's wife without proof. So, instead of confronting me, she started quietly documenting everything: my slowed reactions, repeated phrases, the wine ritual. And in February, she'd called Marcus with an unexplained hunch about checking my blood for sedatives. That hunch was the seed of everything Marcus later confirmed on his own. She'd overheard Cassandra mention her workplace by name at a dinner party months earlier and understood then that Cassandra had known exactly where she worked and had chosen not to say anything, which told her everything about what was coming. She'd been keeping a notebook in her locker at Alara, not her apartment, because she suspected correctly that someone might search her home. My daughter had been running her own quiet investigation in parallel with mine for 7 months, protecting me from her fear, the same way I'd been protecting her from mine. We've been running the same operation from different ends, she said. I think it's time we compared notes. The gala was the following night. I wore the black suit Diana had helped me pick out for her own funeral. 400 people filled the Beverly Hills ballroom. Marcus had Reyes's officers positioned in plain clothes around the room. At 7:40, Vivian took the stage uninvited and accused an unnamed intern of destroying a VIP gown. Cassandra leaned into the mic and asked loudly how a nobody like Claire had ever been trusted with it in the first place. 400 faces turned to my daughter's table. I walked to the stage and took the microphone. My name is Raymond Hole. I'm Claire Holt's father. I told the room slowly and without heat that the woman who'd just spoken wasn't named Vivian Hole. That her real name was Vera Maslow, that her entire background was fabricated, that the annulment paperwork had already been filed that morning. I told them about the $840,000 moved through a Nevada shell company. I held up the security still of Cassandra cutting the gown herself. I told them Sandra Vance, the Aurora director, had been paid $60,000 from that same shell company to make sure my daughter's evaluations tanked and her position became untenable. And I told them that as of the previous afternoon, I owned 60% of the company they were all standing in. Cassandra bolted for the exit and walked straight into an officer's path. Detective Reyes came up the stage steps with the warrants. I said one word to Vivian, her real name, Vera, quiet, in front of every camera in the room, and watched 20 years of careful construction come apart on her face. Derek Sloan, panicking, approached Marcus mid-chaos, trying to cut a deal, and handed him a fully recorded confession in the process. I brought Claire up onto that stage, put my arm carefully around her bruised ribs, and told 400 people exactly who she was. A UCLA honors graduate who'd earned her position without ever using my name, who'd been humiliated in that building and put in a hospital by people in that room, and who was also the sole heir to everything I owned. Later that night, Vivian asked to see me from her holding cell without her lawyer present. I didn't go in, but I stood outside the window and watched her sit alone, gown still on, face finally undirected, not performing for anyone, just tired in a way that looked for the first time in 2 years, real. The intake officer told me she'd said one thing when she was brought in. I didn't plan to stay this long. I never got a clean answer for what that meant. Some things don't resolve. You just learn to carry them. Cassandra took a plea. 2 years in state custody, restitution, a permanent restraining order. Vivian got 18 months suspended to 2 years of supervised probation, full restitution of the money she'd taken, mandatory counseling. Sandra Vance kept her job only long enough to apologize to my daughter's face before my attorneys handled the rest. Janet Morse's coercion was formally recognized. Her record stayed clean. She was back at her desk the following Monday with the coffee already poured. Claire went back to ERA, not as an intern, Director of Creative Development, reporting to the board. On one condition, she insisted on herself. No favors, no adjustments. She'd earn it the same as before. In December, I drove past the same street vendor on Wilshire and bought 2 more bunches of sunflowers. I brought them to her office where the ones from her birthday still sat dried and curled in a coffee mug on her desk. She keeps them until they're done, she told me. I sat across from my daughter in the room where all of it started in December light and told her about my morning. I spent 2 years trusting a performance instead of watching the pattern. Trust without discernment isn't a virtue. It's just vulnerability in a good suit. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. The people closest to you aren't automatically the people safest for you. Watch what they protect. Watch what they hide. Watch what happens to the people they claim to love when they think no one important is looking. I made every mistake a father can make except the last one. I didn't stop fighting for my daughter in time. I was lucky enough to get there before it was too late. Not everyone is.